Hello, it's Chuck from Above the Basement, Boston Music and Conversation. We took a trip to beautiful Symphony Hall in Boston, Massachusetts to sit with Tanglewood Festival Chorus Conductor and Boston Symphony Orchestra Choral Director James Burton. Joining us was choir member by night and Google startup entrepreneur by day, Will Koffel. We talked the ins and outs of working in a chorus, conducting 250 or so choral members, singing in different languages, the blending of the many different voices in a chorus, and the wonders of being on stage with Pete Townsend during the epic production of Quadrephenia. So here is our conversation with James Burton and Will Koffel, recorded at Symphony Hall in Boston, Massachusetts.
I'll have you know that I was in London for the royal wedding.
In London? That's fun.
Megan called. She was like, my dad's sick. I need someone to walk me down the aisles.
Ron and I were in Kensington Palace when they announced the engagement.
That's right.
Fun.
How about that?
And actually, you'll be our third Englishman that we've had.
Who were the others?
Right. Because we talked to the Royal Philharmonic.
One fell swoop with just all three of them. Yeah.
Well, she's not from London.
That's right.
She's from.
That's right.
She has an English accent now, but she's not. She's from Maryland, as a matter of fact. Isn't she from Maryland?
Baltimore.
No, some Wisconsin.
It's lovely.
The Carolinas.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks,
but she's been over there long enough that she's starting to.
Really?
I would do the same thing if I was over there for like a week. I was starting to talk, like a chimney sweep.
But you've put in the homework by watching Netflix and The Crown and stuff like that.
Actually,
all the
I
best
haven't. I haven't watched those. I haven't watched The Crown.
Funny enough, like I haven't watched it.
Yeah.
I always think about how people that botch a British accent in movies, but I think about the Americans. Like an American accent is done by a Brit.
We can't tell at all.
And
We
then
get
how-
fooled
Like
all the
Hugh
time.
Laurie,
Exactly.
whose accent is pretty spot on, isn't it?
Who incidentally is a jazz pianist.
He's a dude. I was talking to someone recently about possibly doing The Soldier's Tale with him as the narrator,
Really?
which would be really cool. I think that would be quite a fun
Interesting.
project. He would narrate and I would conduct the band.
Oh, you right. You
Yeah.
would conduct.
This producer guy had him and they'd done a gig with his band. Is it a rhythm and blues band he's got? He's done a couple of albums. And they'd been talking about Stravinsky. Anyway.
That's interesting.
That's
yeah.
another story.
I sat next to him on an airplane once.
Really?
Yes, we became bestest of friends.
Huh.
He never calls me anymore, though.
We're sitting in Symphony Hall right now.
We are.
And James, I should say thanks for having us because this is more of your neck of the woods than ours.
It's fantastic to have you in to Symphony Hall and share this wonderful space with you.
Chuck and I were remarking that if we do a few more of these, he'll have one picture of him there and one picture of me.
Very nice.
I was telling Will we should just sneak a picture of us up on the mantle. They'd never notice.
I'm sure someone would notice.
Well, they'd be like, "Oh, there must be two new angel investors."
Yeah, possibly.
This was an interesting evolution of this conversation, is that I met Will. We met at Mead Hall down the street from Google, right? Through a friend of mine, Dave Binder, who I work with. And we got to talking about entertainment in the podcast world and what we know and what we don't know about it, and music, of course. And I was told by my friend Dave that Will's a fantastic singer and pianist. And here we are at this bar talking about music, and it kind of clicked that why don't we all talk together, and have I got the guy for you to this awesome chorus that I'm part of. And we've been learning a little bit about this chorus. It's got some history.
Certainly has. So what do you know?
Well, so I know that it started in 94, right?
It's actually coming up to its 50th anniversary.
Oh, wait,
It
what-
started 74.
Oh, sorry, 1974 it started.
This is where the editing starts.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, 74, not 94.
I think it was a little later, 70.
7?
I think it's
77.
70.
You were born in 74, that's all I know.
That's right. So I think the chorus is older than me, just.
I'm the oldest
So
man
we're
around.
looking forward to our 50th anniversary in a
happy
couple
anniversary.
of years' time.
Yeah. Okay.
More often than not, I'm ending up being the oldest guy in the room.
Yeah, I'm noticing that.
It's just going to
That's
get worse,
concerning.
Chuck. It's not going to get better.
You were noticing that about yourself or about Chuck?
About myself. Yeah, certainly. When I've worked with professional orchestras and choirs in the last couple of years, I've just suddenly looked around the room, realizing that actually there's more water under my bridge than anyone else in the room.
As an amateur musician, but someone who's always been really serious about it, I must say it was humbling when I found out that Andres Nelsons was younger than me, and that I felt like was a major milestone.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all old.
But, Arthur Fiedler started, I think, when he was like 35, and so did Keith Lockhart when he was 35. I remember
That's when he started here anyways, yeah.
I think that's an interesting age because you've had a lot of experience in the UK prior to coming here. In 2017 is when you took the baton, so to speak.
That's right, yeah.
With the TFC, right? It's almost as if you're young in your career, but yet we joke that we feel old, but this is the time when people can respect you, I would imagine. You have years ahead of you. So it's kind of an interesting age,
I hope
would
so.
think.
And actually, I feel very lucky to be in a business where age is respected, and I feel as a musician, the more I do, the better I get, or at least I hope I do, as long as I'm approaching it with the same level of intensity and creativity, that will remain true forever. One tries to avoid getting stuck in a rut in a working environment. I'm sure everyone does.
Yeah.
And working in a creative industry, where you're always trying to recreate the great works of the past, but also discover new music and work with composers who are writing music for our own age. There's so much to do. I certainly have never felt that I'm sort of stagnating. And it's wonderful to be a conductor and knowing full well that the sort of quintessential picture of a conductor is of a creaky old person who's conducting with small gestures, but the orchestra are blazing away like fire. And I'm picturing myself as an 80-year-old, and that's what I'm aiming for.
But I almost disagree with you. I'm seeing so many young conductors. Like we just talked to Ash Gordon. She's a violist, and I was looking up some of the conductors and composers that she's worked with. There's all these young people. So I was looking at a lot of video of a whole bunch of conductors who are either my age or younger. So I almost don't have that picture of like that old, with the white hair.
I think that might have changed in our lifetime.
Yeah, maybe,
because you've got people like Gustavo Dudamel at LA Phil, who's one of those quintessentially young people who's burst on the scene as a very young man. I think that there is always room in the music industry for youth and talent and so on. So you've got both, because there's also the respect for the elder musician who's really gone through the repertoire and knows how to make things work with a beautiful economy of either gesture or just time management, and can get an orchestra and a chorus sounding absolutely fantastic with the minimum of work and fuss. At the same time, you've got room for someone to come in and be a firebrand and read the riot act and change things up at the other end.
One of the great opportunities working with the Boston Symphony is, of course, we have our own set of sort of legendary conductors, Seiji Ozawa and Andres Nelson, but the BSO also has the weight and the relationships globally to bring in all of the best conductors around the world. So for me, singing in this chorus, the opportunity to work with the very best musical leaders from around the world, whether it be, a Bernard Haitink or a Sir Colin Davis. One of our chorus favorites was Rafael Freuberg de Burgos, and he delivered an amazing Beethoven 9, one of these pieces that many people in this chorus have sung that piece hundreds of times. So to find, as James was talking about, that newness in a piece that you're delivering kind of over and over again, when you see a conductor extract that at whatever age they are, but we get this opportunity to work with the very best conductors from all over the world, not just the BSO family.
Why don't we circle back to how you guys know each other and how this connection happened through singing?
Maybe if I go first, because I have been a guest of the Boston Symphony while the Boston Symphony was looking for a new conductor for its chorus. So I came 2 or 3 times over a year or so, and at the time I was living in the UK, and it was a great pleasure for me to come here and make some musical friends. And it's not everywhere you go where you feel that you walk in a room and something special happens, but that's certainly what I felt when I walked in with the TFC.
Had you been to Boston before?
I had, actually, yeah. I'd been a guest of the Boston Pops 20 years ago.
Oh, really?
I was just out of college.
As a musician? Or
as a musician.
Where do you play?
Well, I was working as an orchestrator, and I wrote some orchestrations which were played by the Boston Pops, especially for the folk singer Arlo Guthrie. What I did in that project was I took the original recordings and transferred all of the other instruments which weren't played by Arlo himself, and transferred them to the orchestra, but was recreating and creating a sort of orchestral sonority around what Arlo was doing. We were doing a song, and the original back in the 70s had a gospel choir in it. So I went downstairs and met the gospel choir and was rehearsing with them in the room where I now regularly rehearse the choirs here. So I've actually been knocking around the halls here for 20 years or so.
That's cool. So you said 20 years ago you came over, got a taste of it. Zoom forward 2017, you're here, you're the new guy. Will, you've been around for a few years, right? Singing in the TFC.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so I'm a Boston native, born and raised in the area. And for me, I started in what I think is probably a really typical path for maybe listeners of this podcast. I went to public elementary school, and the curriculum said that I was going to play the recorder in 3rd grade. And so I started playing the recorder. And then in 4th grade, band was introduced, and I picked up the trumpet. I was really a product of that system. And I think I took to it, and I think it quickly became stitched into who I was. I started going to orchestra summer programs, and the first time I actually visited Tanglewood, I think was for the Days in the Arts program when I was in 5th grade. And this first time I met Yo-Yo Ma was out there, and there are these kind of magical moments that happen out on the Tanglewood grounds that the BSO I think all appreciates, and as do many of the audiences who come out every summer to see us. Fast forward for me through kind of high school, I started playing piano seriously and became an accompanist, and then actually got into singing relatively late in my teenage years and did a cappella in college, as many folks have done. And then I was at MIT and really was kind of torn between this love of math and science and the burgeoning computer industry at the time in the late 90s. Music was really part of my identity. So I did a double major in computers and music. And then I think, as many of us do, when we leave college, all the vehicles for that kind of creativity and student groups and stuff fall by the wayside. And I think a lot of people are left with a gap. And so for me, having learned about the Tanglewood Festival Chorus in the Boston area as this unique volunteer chorus, that filled that gap for me and became kind of my grown-up extracurricular. And without much of a plan, here I am enjoying the opportunity 18 years later.
Did you know Mark Ethier? He's a president of Isotope. He's an MIT guy. He's a music composition major too. And I think he was a computer.
Similar age too.
Yeah, it's obviously it's not uncommon there. Other people do it. But there was MIT has a great music program. I studied there with Peter Child, who's a great composer, John Harbison, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, and has done a bunch of commissions for the BSO. So there's really a strong faculty there for music.
I was there for the first time 2 years ago. I've never set foot in it. It's right across the street from where I work at MGH. I can't believe how enormous it is physically, but also it's the breadth of departments from like the humanities to science to economics to astrophysics. It's just crazy.
Aren't all the buildings attached? Aren't there tunnels underneath?
They call it the Infinite Corridor, and there's a substantial kind of tunnel system and connectedness of all those buildings.
Okay, so 18 years ago, Will starts. James comes on board in 2017. There's 250 people in this chorus, at the Tanglewood Festival Chorus, right?
That's right, yeah. It's a very large group.
It's a large group, but there's not everybody's performing at the same time. You have a rotation system, right?
It's sort of, yeah. One of our big challenges and joys at the same time is providing the chorus for the Boston Pops holiday concerts in December. There's only room on stage for about 52 singers, somewhere like that.
So it's first come, first serve?
Well, we rotate the teams, and some people have Tuesday nights free, so they do the Tuesday night ones, and some people are actually free on Saturday afternoons, so they do that ones. We have a fantastic sense of camaraderie as we go through this month of concerts. Next season, we'll be performing 34 holiday concerts. Wow. Which is a significant...
It's not the same 50 every time.
No, but it's the same chorus name, and we have one list of names in the program, and the audience will come and hopefully hear the choir singing at exactly the same standard, although from one day to another it might be a completely different set of people. Yeah. So it's my job is to hustle those folk into a choral discipline and make sure that they're enjoying themselves, but also performing up to a brilliantly high level.
How do you make that determination when you're ready for prime time? So what are the factors that go in when you think that, okay, this group is ready for this concert?
It's all in the planning, actually. If you are a part of a band, say, and you get together with your friends and you've got a gig in 3 weeks, you'll organise a rehearsal, and maybe it doesn't go so well, so maybe you put in a couple more, and then it's sounding pretty good the night before, and then you do the gig and it goes well. But for what we have to do is all of the foresight of that. So depending on what the music is and the challenges of it, I will make a judgment as to how much time the chorus will need together to prepare that. We will send the music out in advance to the singers so they can read through the score. If there's some difficult passages, they might learn those in advance. They're often singing in foreign languages. Our next project we're doing is in Italian, so we'll be providing them with some tuition And at a certain point, we'll provide a language tape as well, so they can study and practice at home in the same manner that the coach who comes in to help our rehearsals. So the coach will make the tape and just guide them, and so we're all approaching the score in the same way.
I'm curious, when you're doing either like maybe a German opera or an Italian opera or something, do you speak these languages, or are you just kind of, is it all phonetic for you?
We're always fortunate when there's people in the chorus who do speak the languages, and certainly in this chorus, there are people who are fluent in a number of languages, but I don't think anyone in all the languages we sing in.
Yeah.
One of the early things that I had to learn coming into this chorus was a bunch of the fundamental language skills. The IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, is one of these tools that can be applied to help kind of find your way through those languages. Coming on 18 years now, my ability to read and pronounce, for example, German, is actually pretty extraordinary given that I can't tell you a word of it. But I think that you learn, and the discipline actually of speaking the language versus singing the language is an interesting distinction as well. Being able to speak it doesn't necessarily provide you with the tools to sing it in the clearest way or with the best technique.
Yeah.
And I think that's true in foreign languages. So in many ways, actually, the chorus has probably learned to sing German better than we have to speak German.
But singing German and singing Italian, those got to be two physically very different ways of singing.
Very different. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell us the difference between singing in German and singing in Italian, other than the actual words that you're saying?
Well, what have you found of the fundamentals? This is a bit of a test for us.
I mean, I'm curious because there's a funny video where the guy says a word, and he says it in like several different languages. Says it in Italian, says it in French, and then he says it in German. And it's always, it's a very, the language is very strong.
Classically
language.
Austere.
Yeah.
First of all, we always try to start from what's the actual thing we're singing about, right? I mean, there's poetry in all of this, right? And if we're singing a requiem, that's very different than if we're singing a wedding march or these sorts of things. So I think starting from there, all the languages have their idiomatic qualities, and part of that is, in German, there's a lot more than complexity in the vowel sounds in German, and the way that these consonants are sort of used explosively, and I think a lot more forward in German. And Italian has these idioms like these double consonants and these pure vowels and these bright A's, and the hardest thing in my experience is actually shifting between those. So when we're fortunate to have an entire piece in Italian, you can take on that persona, sort of wear that coat. I think when you switch between them as a non-native speaker, that's actually a very different mental trick.
When you take a lyric line of a full few pages of a song in Italian or German, do you have the translation available that you can just read through?
We'll provide the translation. And often the language coach has done the translation themselves, so we get a real sense of what that person who's coming in to work with us thinks about the language, and they will be choosing particular ways to translate certain idioms, for instance. What's wonderful for me as the conductor of the chorus is to have a colleague to work with and to hear what they think, because I think it's often very easy for them to sort of sit back and think, well, I'm only doing the words, whereas my approach is the words are the beginning for the music, and as a composer, I've written a lot of vocal music, and it's so much easier to treat the words as the starting point and to then phrase them and so on. So I take that relationship very seriously. And over this last year or so, we've had various coaches come in working with us in Italian and German. We've done a project in Norwegian earlier this year. And most recently, we did a project in Hebrew when we did Bernstein's Kaddish Symphony, all of which is in Hebrew. As a singer, your awareness of language grows. As Will was saying, over time, you become very familiar with the way a language works. And as a singer myself, when I was young, I did a lot of Latin and sung a lot in English. But when I became a teenager, the repertoire that I was singing, so much of it was by Bach and therefore in German. By the time I got to university, I was already very sort of familiar with how to sing German, but I hadn't ever at that point worked in opera, so I'd never really done any Italian at all. And so my Italian knowledge has come through working in the opera. But going back to the Hebrew, you hardly ever sing in Hebrew unless you're a cantor.
I was going to mention before, I'm Jewish, and I've been singing Hebrew my whole life.
Right.
And guess what? I have no idea what I'm saying. Singing. I mean, maybe you know a few words, but you can have a beautiful melody attached to chanted Hebrew. And there's something beautiful about that. It's like a meditative thing that you're so ingrained as a kid to these melodies. You know, it's nice to know the translation as you get older, to know what you're singing, but there was almost something very mysterious about that you didn't know what it was saying.
The other side of the coin is you're talking about you're singing a language that you don't understand, but you're singing probably to 500 people who have no clue what you're saying at all. And you have to, in your singing and in the conducting and in the story, if it's an opera, you have to tell the story, and somehow people get the story.
I worked a lot at English National Opera in London, and the unique thing about that opera house is that all of the performances take place in English. So we're doing La Bohème or Don Giovanni or whatever. But actually, having worked there over 5 years or so, there was a certain sort of way of using English and translating and singing English as a language really well, which was the house style. And they had a whole team of translators who would try to work on the best possible translation, but also think about how close that translation was to the original vowel sounds, for instance, of the original. So there's a very specialized job, but a lot of our work on the meaning of the words and how it sounds as it comes across. And at the last hurdle, as it were, of our rehearsal process, when we work together with the orchestra, I will then be out in the hall listening very carefully to the chorus and the orchestra together to think about how that text is coming across so that the audience has the best possible shot at understanding. And earlier this season, we had a celebration of Leipzig Week in Boston, which was conducted by Andres, and a delegation from the Gewandhaus were visiting us. Can
you explain what that is?
Gewandhaus Orchestra is an ancient orchestra where Andres has just taken on the music directorship the same time as the BSO, so that we're actually working with the Gewandhaus.
That's kind of his side gig?
Well, they would like to think the BSO is the side gig. We're actually working with them.
It's been running longer than the BSO.
That's right.
But
yes, Mendelssohn was the music director and Schumann, so it's been going on a little while. So we had Germans in the audience, and we had some lovely comments about the way that the chorus was pronouncing the German. We did a couple of pieces of Schumann, which was a real treat for me, not being a native speaker, but caring very much about how the language comes across to an audience. And of course, if someone speaks the language, you want them to enjoy the effort that you've made.
When you mention how English creates some new challenges for you, sometimes the piece is written for a certain language. So you may have a note in there that's supposed to go with a certain vowel sound that would work in German. You have to figure out a way around it in a different language. Is that ever an issue?
Right.
That's right. And certainly when I worked at English National Opera, that was often a challenge. And in our early music rehearsals, some of the singers would come in and say, do you mind terribly if we change this word? And so actually the translator would be in those rehearsals. And sometimes they would say no. And then we get into all sorts of interesting discussions.
And we find that the chorus actually is usually presented both with what would be called a poetic translation, the kind of translation which would appear in the program notes for an audience, as well oftentimes as with a literal translation, either side by side or written right into the score, that is dealing more with the particulars of each word. And as James mentioned, sometimes those literal translations teach us, as much. Really, those two things have to come together. But the way the original composer intended it in their language is usually both native to them and also often intentional for the color. As you said, what register a certain vowel appears in different voice parts can be very nuanced, can affect the whole balance of the chorus. And so when you change those, as a composition major in college, I spent a lot of time looking at how do the different instruments behave, the relative registers of those, the volume that they produce at all those different registers. And so it's not different with the voices, and changing the language can absolutely resurface those same challenges.
There's a vocal quality to the tenor, to the alto, to the baritone, of course. How many variations are there typically within each
It's
Hundreds,
infinite.
you think?
It's
Yeah.
infinite. That's the joy for me, which is that no two voices I've ever heard are the same.
Can you pick them out of a lineup?
Yeah. In rehearsal, I can often look along a line, and just from the position of someone's jaw, I can see what needs
Oh, but
to
if
be
you're
tweaked.
not, but if you're not looking at them,
Will will testify to this. Sometimes, without trying to pick people out in the chorus, which is a sort of not particularly a popular approach to chorus rehearsal. I'll say, I will
suck.
I will look away from that area, and I'll say, you guys, you need to move your tongue forward or whatever.
I think
leave
an
them to do the
Englishman
work.
would be much more tactful than you suck.
I don't know.
The choral singing, both the discipline of that as a singer, I think is very different than, obviously the underlying technique and the way that you take care of your voice and the control can be the same, but you are applying those techniques typically in a very different way in a choral setting. And I think similarly when you're conducting, the idea of how you bring those together and what order you put them in, who you stand next to each other, how you look for a homogeneous sound out of
wild.
that chorus, I mean, that's really the challenge that is what goes in front of the audience.
James is nodding his head now. Like, that must be something you think about when you're putting together 50 people. They're the ingredients.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I can exemplify, a few years back, I was preparing choirs for a really big choral piece with orchestra, and we recorded it. There were 320 people on stage, all of which I had auditioned and trained over a number of years. I arranged the seating chart, knowing exactly the timbre, the strength, musically or not, of each and every one of those singers. That made the recording so much easier because they basically just slung up on a couple of microphones. And of course, the sound blended because I'd done that in the planning.
Fascinating.
So
I never thought of that. This is a geographical way of
yeah,
putting this together.
if you're planning to plant a garden, you don't put all the big trees at one end, for instance, or you might, but
You should
that's a
see
particular
Chuck's
type
house,
of garden, you know. And that's why it's such a joy to have different conductors and different ways of making music, because even
interesting.
by your gestures in a rehearsal, you can change that sound. And what the joy of the BSO is that you can change the sound of that orchestra with a look.
So Wuman plays an instrument called the pipa, P-I-P-A. It's been around for 2,000 years. She plays with Yo-Yo Ma on Silk Road. So she said that when Ozawa came in the 80s, she was blown away. There was this Japanese conductor in China playing with the BSO. The first time I believe that the choral part of the BSO came to Asia, and I think China, was in 1994. This is all before your time, obviously, but I just wanted to talk about the history of the TFC a little bit because it's done some pretty wild things around the world.
You know, I can speak a little bit. This was also, the China trip was before my time. You know, I can say that we've been afforded the opportunity to accompany the Boston Symphony on a handful of European musical tours for me.
So you've gone?
I have. So I've done a couple of tours through the music festivals in Europe, including playing in London, Royal Albert Hall. I remember that well, singing the Ravel Daphnis at Royal Albert Hall. And very interesting. It's interesting to see internationally the different audiences, the way they kind of approach the classical music scene. That's always been interesting to me in that kind of environment.
I love Royal Albert Hall.
It's amazing to see the pictures on the wall as you're there preparing for a classical music concert, and to see everything from professional tennis to wrestling to all of these things that have kind of come through Royal Albert Hall as an entertainment venue.
Eric Clapton and everything.
Right,
in
of
between,
course, yeah, of
My
course.
first performance at the Albert Hall was as a chorister, singing the national anthems of the UK and the USA for the tennis, for the Whiteman Cup, which was the cup competed for between the women of the UK and the USA. I was 10 years old.
That's so cool.
Really?
Wow.
The tours is certainly one of those things that's memorable. We sang the national anthem for the Super Bowl one year.
Really?
We didn't sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl, but there was a Super Bowl in which we actually recorded the national anthem, and what you heard back on television was our performance of it. It was the Super Bowl in January or February of 2002, and it was after 9/11. Keith Lockhart was conducting members of the Boston Pops Brass, and then we had done a recording in November here at Symphony Hall, which actually got broadcast. So there's these unique opportunities that you
that's
have.
fascinating.
We've gotten to sing backup for James Taylor. I did an incredible concert for the 120th anniversary of Carnegie Hall. So there's a bunch of incredible opportunities. And then, frankly, the community that you get from being kind of in this chorus, and the friends that I've met have opened doors, whether it's to accompany colleagues for their recitals or being invited to record movie soundtracks or video game soundtracks. So I think there's a community that you find in Boston, and you guys know all about this. You've been living in it for a while, but having the connection through an institution like the BSO ends up opening doors into the Boston music community at large.
What's wonderful is to inherit a chorus which has this wonderful history. We've had some wonderful performances, which I've enjoyed so much preparing. Obviously working with Andrus and with Keith Lockhart. We did a wonderful show last summer at the end of the Tanglewood season when Pete Townsend came.
Come on.
And we did Quadrephenia.
You were doing that?
We did the classic Quadrephenia live with Alfie Boe singing, who was absolutely sensational.
Oh, I wanted to go to this. It was last summer.
It was great fun, and it brought a great crowd to the Tanglewood lawn.
I was at Tanglewood the night before. I saw the Avid Brothers, and Pete Townsend was playing the next night. So I just missed you.
Well, it's just fantastic. As a musician, what I loved about it was that it wasn't a rock band playing the music with a couple of violins adding in. There was no drum kit, for instance. So all of the percussion was supplied by the traditional orchestral section. So if there were tom-toms and then a cymbal crash, that was played by two people, not one. What was so remarkable about it for me was to watch Alfie Boe take on the role that Roger Daltrey had sung, which has got umpteen top Bs, top Cs, which really you shouldn't try at home in a locked room. You need to be out in the field somewhere. Alfie was just so energized and took the audience with him.
Alfie Boe is a world famous singer. Comes from England?
He is English, and he's got an opera background, and now he's doing these rock concerts. He actually was back at the Pops this summer and did a Rock the Pops concert, which was fantastic as well.
They did the Zeppelin tunes. I saw that.
Zeppelin and Queen songs, and just nailing these top notes, which really should come with a government health warning.
Is there something about Pete Townsend and that resonated with you because of your background?
What's funny is that Pete's family lived 2 roads away from my family in West London. I was told all of these stories about the crossover of Pete's family, who ran a sort of bric-a-brac second-hand furniture store, which I used to walk past on the way to school. This shop was open for years and years, and
is it Acton, by the way?
Acton, that's right.
Acton, England.
That's right.
Pete and Roger, I think, were both they went to school in Acton.
And Freddie Mercury studied at Ealing Art College, which is just up the road. And it's amazing to think about all of these characters who were knocking around the same area of London. And I just have to admit that my dad, who was an amateur musician, did play on the same concert as Pete Townsend when the band wasn't called The Who. I think it was a former thing. They did a gig at Acton Town Hall in 1962 or something.
Acton Town Hall, nice. I love it.
Next stop, Tanglewood. It's brilliant.
I was on stage for that concert, and when you're in the chorus, as James said, we kind of get these scores and they get sent to us and we crack open the bindings, but you have this sort of detached quality of it. As you move towards the performance, we start to pull in more things, and of course in the end the performance is this collaboration between us and the conductor and our peers and the orchestra and the audience and the composer, but each of those people start to get layered in one at a time. And so you have an experience with Tanglewood especially, where we typically are doing one-shot performance of a piece that we've maybe worked on for weeks or even months leading up to this moment, and there's an energy there, there's kind of an electricity, and then when you go and throw onto that somebody with the presence and the history and the experience of Pete Townsend or an Alfie Boe who's then really just delivering, so everything just gets amped up, and that's something that we see all the time at Tanglewood, but especially in fun concerts like that.
Are you tenor or what are you?
I sing bass.
For singers, can they kind of go between? Can it be like a soprano that leans towards?
James is the expert in this, but I think, as he said, all voices are different, and I think there's a continuum, and that's a combination of maybe the natural placement of your voice as well as the command you have over that instrument, which again is not different from instrumentals as well.
Yeah, some people have a big range, but perhaps they sit more comfortably in one bit of their voice, and that's where a singing teacher would explore, okay, well, that's where this voice feels like you found a sort of middle, and then you work from there. In addition to bass, tenor, and working up the choir to the alto line and soprano, those are the traditional boundaries of those voice parts. But you also have a mezzo-soprano, who is the sort of middle line between soprano and alto. So you've got the high squeakies, so they're the sopranos.
Sopranos.
The high squeakies.
And then below that is mezzo-soprano, so mezzo meaning middle, and then alto, sometimes called contralto. And with an all-male choir, that line would be sung by countertenors. So that's about the same range. Then you get the high tenors, and then you'll get the baritone, and then bass.
We should point out that you have a whole other life. When you talked about MIT and the fact that you had that separation of music and computers, there really is a connection there between the arts and the science. What is it about your job at Google? Tell us kind of what you do on a daily basis, just to dumb it down for someone like me that doesn't understand.
Make it really dumb.
What I started in was really the kind of internet startup. So these are early stage companies from two folks in a garage. They've got an idea. It's going to be technology enabled. They bootstrap it on the nights and weekends. Maybe they go out and raise money from friends and family. Maybe they go out to a traditional venture capitalist and they raise $5 million and they hire a team and they get offices and they kind of go out and build this product. And they hope that they can find product market fit, that they deliver this thing and there's value out there and people will pay for it. So where I fit in is that I've been a serial entrepreneur, primarily in a CTO role, so a chief technology officer at early stage technology companies. And I've founded 6 venture-backed startup companies. This company that I was with, we were doing a lot of work with Amazon, one of the leading cloud providers, and then we caught the attention of Google Cloud, another one of the leading cloud providers. And so those discussions
that was the path to Google
led to an acquisition of our company. So we sold our company to Google.
You're in the right place. Boston is exploding with all these. I hear of all these companies moving here. Right now, you're in Kendall Square. Mm-hmm. It seems to be a huge renaissance of startups.
Boston is a great startup ecosystem. It actually has been for a while. It was one of the first United States ecosystems to really mature, like San Francisco and Boston and New York, partly fueled by our academic presence,
right,
our hospital and healthcare presence, a lot of research,
but now you're
research
that's come
it's
here. It's revitalizing all these different areas of Boston, whether it be South Boston or Kendall Square, or it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is great. But I mean, I think to bring it to your question, Ron, I think that...
Well, I figured it out.
Oh, you did? Tell me the answer. How?
Yeah, tell us.
Dear Conductor, you are a company startup conductor.
I don't think it's too far from the truth, and partially it's by contrast. One of the things that I love about singing in the chorus is, on the one hand, getting to watch, as I mentioned earlier, these incredible conductors. So really to see what are the leadership styles, what lessons are there to take from that, and how you lead teams across different disciplines in the business world and the technology world. Kind of comparing those leadership styles is really interesting. And the music conductors have this power where they're leading with their gestures and their looks and their body language.
Yeah.
And they may also bring language to the table to talk about the vision that they have for a piece. But many times you have a conductor who doesn't even speak English natively, who's communicating to an American orchestra the vision that they want for that. I actually quite like this chorus and the nature of it being an all-volunteer chorus that's drawn from the Boston community, is that you get this set of 250 people, all of whom are deeply committed to music, many of whom have been doing music since they were a child, but all of whom have day jobs.
Oh, it's very special, actually, and it's very humbling, knowing full well that when we start rehearsals of a weekday evening, we're probably 14, 15 hours into these lovely people's days already. And it's up to me to re-energize them and to focus their minds on a singular task. I'll often do some physical activities just to remind them that what they're doing is a physical thing, and they need to be able to...
But it must be spiritual, too. What I'm trying to get at, too, is that from their perspective, they're all connected by music. But there's got to be something there that you're orchestrating almost like a spiritual leader.
This is their release.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it would be a priest's job to do the same on a Sunday morning. If that image works, you build a bridge to another place, and therefore, if you're all in that place together, the outside world is shut out. We all share that one communal space of time. That's very, very powerful, and it's why there's that incredible sense of camaraderie which you get in a choir. I think it's the same if you're in a sports team and you've got a busy life, but if you play on one night a week and you meet up with the same guys, but you're doing something which you cannot possibly think about anything else, because what you're doing is complicated and you don't want to let down the team and you want to play your part to the best of your ability, just like Will was saying. And that's fantastic, because I get to work with people and sort of have the wall built around us, and we're shielded by that.
While I've been in this course for 18 years, there's folks who've been in this course for 45 or more years. Yeah. And for many of us, this is the singular most important opportunity for us to exercise that creative side or get that music. And it is spiritual, I think, for many folks.
It's why people, until they're 70, 80 years old or whatever, they're still going to be in a rock band. They're still going to go.
It's addictive.
I'm never going to stop playing.
Yeah.
When you're with the BSO on stage, take Mahler's 90-minute symphony. You're conducting along with Andrus, right? So Andrus Nelson is
in the actual performance.
Right,
the
right,
role
right,
of the role of the chorus master is actually all but done, apart from listening in the audience.
Really?
As the conductor of the performance, you direct everybody.
All of your work has been complete up until the moment of the performance.
That's right. And I work very collaboratively and happily with Andrus and Keith. In fact, I gave my debut with the Pops in the Holiday Pops concerts last Christmas.
Do you use a baton?
I do when I'm working with an orchestra.
But you won't when you're working with a chorus?
Very rarely. That's a whole other discussion about
because Keith doesn't use a baton. We talked about Keith because he's got a carpal.
He used to use a baton. Is that right?
But now he just uses.
That's
his hands.
right.
He's evolved over the years, I think, to just use his little movements with his hand.
Well, there was an audience in London recently that was very offended when a conductor did a concert using a toothpick.
Toothpick.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Adrian Bolt, who's one of famous old English conductors, used a very, very long baton. So he did very sparing gestures, but of course by moving a long baton,
how long was
a
it?
little bit, probably 1.5 feet.
That's a long baton.
And then he can hit people if they screw up.
There's a wonderful video which I when I first started conducting was encouraged to watch just to sort of see how little you needed to move, and it was actually the great composer Richard Strauss conducting one of his own operas, which are so incredibly passionate and full of vibrant colour. They're incredible, but Strauss as a conductor was very, very staid. And this video is of him, it's in black and white, filmed in, 1920 or something. And he hardly moves at all. And this is the man who's famous for saying, never look at the brass section, they'll feel encouraged. and this video displays it perfectly. He looks like he's reading the train timetable or something. It's amazing. And then now, of course, you get very passionate, sweaty conductors. But there are lots of different ways to do it.
We look forward to Tanglewood.
Any of your listeners in the Boston area who haven't had the pleasure of coming out, and I know we've got a lot of folks who come from Boston and great audiences that come from New York, but anyone who hasn't had the opportunity, come for an afternoon concert and bring a blanket, some chairs, and a bottle of wine, and it's a really amazing place to listen to music.
I didn't know that when I went to see the Avid Brothers last summer. It's very unusual. People were bringing up wagons with tables and chairs and coolers, and you can bring anything you want, and people were setting up tables, and you could have a couch and lamps.
They're very professional.
There's a whole ceremony to it,
it's fantastic.
It's actually lovely to see groups who come together to come to Tanglewood. We know that they come once a year and that they're coming from all different directions to say, okay guys, which concert are we going to this year? And it's the Saturday night, it's the film night, John Williams is going to be there, or whatever it is. And if people haven't been before, it's definitely a place that you should have come to at least once, just to see what it's all about. It's very lovely.
Well, we're really happy that you decided to come back after 20 years. Thank you. And we're so happy that you joined the chorus.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to have James here, and thank you guys for telling the story.
It's lovely to meet you both.
Yeah.
Thanks, fellas. We would like to thank James and Will for taking the time out of their busy days to sit with us, and also the fine people at the BSO for all their help. Find out the entire BSO and Tanglewood schedule at bso.org. And please go to abovethebasement.com where you can join us on Patreon, sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look out all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique. How would you like to join us in creating great conversations that inspire and connect? Patreon is a membership platform that provides a way for creators like us to build relationships and provide exclusive experiences to subscribers or patrons. We have been self-financed since we got off the ground in June of 2016, but in order to continue to fully invest all we can in each episode, we need your patronage. For more information, please go to patreon.com/abovethebasement.